Welcome to my podcast, The Government Mechanic. I am your host, Dr. Lynn Sandra Kahn, and I am the Government Mechanic. This is a very special episode, episode 9. We call these Under the Hood, where we look at one very specific federal agency in detail and try to make sense of what's happening. With me today are Kathleen Monahan from Florida. Hi, Kathy. And Brenda Cochran, a dairy farmer from Pennsylvania. Hi, Brenda. All right. So, as some of you may know or not, in 1862, President Lincoln established the U.S. Department of Agriculture. It's a very old agency. And 2.5 years later, in his final message to Congress, Lincoln called it the People's Department. At that time, about half of all Americans were farmers, and today it's a little less than 2%. So we are going to look at the mission statement, the strategic goals, some of the priorities, the metrics, and the communication style of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. I will read the mission statement. I'll try to read the mission statement. It's really long. So here's what it says. To serve all Americans by providing effective, innovative, science-based public policy leadership in agriculture, food and nutrition, natural resource protection and management, rural development, and related issues with a commitment to deliverable, equitable, and climate-smart opportunities that inspire and help America thrive. Well, team, what do you think of that mission statement?
It's way too long and way too wordy.
And not very measurable and not very inspiring. And
Definitely
wouldn't fit on a coffee mug. What did you think of it, Brenda?
I think it's worthless as far as what I'm doing on a farm.
And it does not speak to the needs of family farmers at all.
Absolutely not.
Okay, so that's what we have to say about the mission statement. Really bad, not very effective, kind of weird, some of it. And then I started looking at the strategic goals. So I'm just going to say what they are. There were 6 strategic goals, and then we can talk about them. Strategic goal 1 is combat climate change to support America's working lands, natural resources, and communities. Goal 2 is ensure America's agriculture system is equitable, resilient, and prosperous. Strategic Goal 3, foster an equitable and competitive marketplace for all agriculture producers. Strategic Goal 4, provide all Americans safe, nutritious food. Strategic Goal 5, expand opportunities for economic development and improve quality of life in rural and tribal communities. And Goal 6, attract, inspire, and retain an engaged and motivated workforce that's proud to represent USDA. Oh, well, I'll go to Brenda first. And what do you think of these strategic goals?
Well, for me, their strategic goal is to exterminate the rural class. So those enumerated points are basically just, as I said earlier, worthless. There's absolutely no value in those statements because what they're doing at USDA is exterminating the very people who should be able to produce the food locally.
And straight out, let me just say one thing that really irks me as a strategic planner. I'm really irked when strategic goal number 1 isn't the essence of the core business of that agency. And combating climate change is not the essence of the mission of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So I'm not even sure that belongs in there. But as far as I'm concerned, they failed. None of these goals have been met. None of them. Brenda speaks to the elimination of family-owned and small dairy farms. In 1970, there were 648,000. In 2024, there were 18,000.
Wow.
So we have really decimated the working farmer in this country. So in terms of what they call strategic goal 2, ensuring that the system is fair and prosperous, not happening. Strategic goal 3, finding a marketplace for producers, not happening. Goal 4, providing safe and nutritious food. Let's see, in 2024, there were 1,908 food and or cosmetic recalls, and that's compared with 1,563 in 2023. So more bad food is reaching the marketplace. Opportunities in rural and tribal communities, not happening. Poverty is on the rise. Hunger is on the rise. Hunger is increasing. 13.5% of U.S. households struggle with hunger. So I don't see that any of their goals have been reached, but maybe I'm just cranky. What do you think, Kathy?
I agree with you. I don't think any of them have been met. I really don't. I grew up in upstate New York, as a matter of fact, in dairy farm country. And I know from talking to my friends who inherited their parents' farms that they're really struggling. We need them desperately, and we aren't going to have them if things continue the way they are.
I think that's a point that. Go ahead.
No, I just said that's just my opinion.
I think that's a big point that Brenda made in her individual episode number 5. We're losing farms. We're losing farmers with traditional knowledge and in-depth knowledge. And it's just food is being produced by fewer and fewer big corporations, and farmers are being hung out to dry. Did you have a chance to look at this, Brenda? Did you look at any parts of that strategic plan?
It did. It was very difficult to look at because it's such a farce, and it's dangerous. It's dangerous. It's a publication from the government to give people the perception that everything is hunky-dory and fine, and it's not. My position is that if you harm the farmers, it's inevitable you will harm consumers. Yes. And the USDA has insulated itself away from the people. They don't talk to us farmers. They don't talk to consumers. They don't talk to the businesses on rural main streets that have been put out of business because those of us farming, ranching, cannot circulate any viable income into that community. And as you point out, we have lost creativity, inventiveness, entrepreneurship. We've snuffed our young class of potential farmers. The best they get is to be shunted into the land grant, so they come out as some sort of ag technocrat to fit into the corporate model.
One thing that amazed me was I couldn't find in this strategic plan any statement of performance measures, any statement saying how they're doing on any of these goals that we've all agreed are poorly written anyway. But there's no metrics in this report. I couldn't find them. Did you, Kath?
No, there aren't any. There are no measurable measures. There are none. There are no measures to really be able to see how things are going. You can't measure success or failure because there's nothing there that says this is success, this is failure.
Well, I would like to add that their success is the unwritten strategic goal, which is to eliminate the rural class. So when Dr. Kahn points out the number of dairy farms back in the 70s versus what we have today, that is their metric of success. They are basically delivering on what the agenda is, which is to exterminate the rural class and put all eaters at great peril to have no food. The government issued the Flanagan Report in secret under Richard Nixon in the early 70s. Peter Flanagan drafted it. It's available. It was not supposed to be published. And that was an enumeration of the strategic goal to get rid of the small family dairy farmers who were the predominant producers of local milk in those days because, quote, the government didn't need them. They would get in the way of the strategic goal of exporting grain into the free trade market and bring foreign dairy products into this country. They would maintain a few expanded facilities to produce the minimal amount of fluid milk that the government needed. And that's what they've done. What we're living is the implementation by the ag committees through farm bills administered by the USDA to get rid of the very people that President Lincoln intended to help by forming the USDA.
Did you want to add something, Kathy?
I
See you shaking your head.
Yeah, I am, but don't. It comes from going back up home to upstate New York and talking with my friends who actually still have a working dairy farm. And I know how much Annie and her husband are struggling to just stay above water, you know? And it's what she says. They're just trying to get rid of the family farmer.
And I think what consumers and everyone who eats food, that would be everyone, doesn't quite understand is that farmers cannot price their milk. It's the government that sets
That's
the
right.
price of fluid milk. And they set the price below what it costs the small dairy farmer to produce that milk.
Mhm.
So what Brenda has said about that, if that's the policy, that they're setting a price for milk that won't cover the farmer's costs, then inherently the policies are to drive family farmers bankrupt.
Yeah.
And that's been happening to the tune of tens of thousands of farmers leaving the system and leaving the land, I think. Brenda, did you want to add?
Well, right now, the danger continues because there's imminently going to be another 5-year farm bill that will be passed by Congress, signed by a president, and then administered by USDA. You know, my position on the farm bill is that it is the needle that the government uses every 5 years to inject poisonous policies into rural America. And this has got to stop. The worst thing that could happen right now for farmers like myself is passing a lame duck farm bill. Okay, absolutely not. They have not heard from the people. They have not heard from the farmers. They have not heard from consumers and the business people who do need to take a position that we've had enough of this consolidation of the food sector by reducing my economic needs at the farm. And you are correct. The government controls the milk price. That has continued to be lowered. USDA, there again, has just finished a federal milk marketing order hearing that I have no say in. It's going to impact my milk price. It was called for by the co-ops and the processors. It's completely in their best interest to get these recommendations passed. Now it's on the dairy farmer to look over what could be anywhere from 100 to 300 some pages of abstruse evidence, testimony, whatever you want to call it. Most dairy farmers do not have the time, do not have the mental patience to look at it, and they're so depressed. How could they want to put themselves into this module of looking at what's going to happen to them? So it's going to fall to the dairy cooperatives that are not living up to the Capra-Volstead Act of 1922 to act for the good of their dairy farmers. They're going to block vote this regulation, and they're calling it the modernization of the FMMO, which was actually revised back in 2000 and implemented what you described, Dr. Kahn, which is lowering the milk price below cost of production. So when that block vote comes through, I won't have had a Democratic transparent vote in that. The co-ops who wanted the hearing, they want to take more money from the farmer's milk check. If this goes through, then I will lose money, and there'll be no statutory opportunity to open that because I can't call a hearing. And that's happening right now. So we have a loaded gun with 2 bullets for the dairy farmer. One will be the farm bill, and the other one is the final vote on this FMMO modernization that will take more money out of my milk check. If I can't cash flow right now, how am I going to cash flow giving more money to the processors? They call this make allowance. I'm under federal obligation to give up a certain value of my milk to the people who process the milk. That's like if the government came in and told somebody who had a forest, you're going to have to pay for the cost of production for people who turn that wood into chairs or baseball bats. I'd like somebody to tell me what sort of sensible business model is this, and then I have to advertise it. I have the mandatory dairy checkoff, which is also administered by USDA. So USDA is the administrative arm of the policies that both parties have supported for decades. And that's why you see the loss of family dairy farmers in our communities.
Yeah.
And I think what folks don't understand is, first of all, the USDA sets the price for milk without taking into account what it costs to produce that milk. They create policies that take money out of the farmer's paycheck. And it's just what you said. It's like charging people who have forest land a charge if somebody takes that wood and turns it into a chair. The co-ops are taking your milk, sending it to the processors. They're turning it into cream or milk or whatever. And you have to pay part of those costs. They're not paying their own costs. So it so completely violates the moral contributions of farmers in this country. And there are many things about this that irk me, but one is every time the USDA says they've talked to farmers, what they mean is they've talked to industrial farmers, the big farmers, not the small farmers, not the family farmers. And part of why they can't talk to them is that they're disappearing, and part of why they won't talk to them is they're not going to like the answer. These are horrible policies that are destructive to farmers and to our rural communities. And we wonder why people in rural America are so angry. This is definitely part of it. Anybody else?
I'd like to respond to what you're saying. It's also at this time in history quite common for these dairy cooperatives to also be processors. Okay, so if they're getting, if this was represent me and they're getting my milk, why are they taking more money from the milk check? Where is this money going? And other farmers will not speak up because they are under intimidation and fear of being thrown off the milk trucks. So you're going to have a lot of people won't speak up as openly as I am. Other farmers are handpicked because they're very comfortable with not rocking the boat. And I don't know if they've got sweetheart deals or not, but the government has no trouble finding farmers who will speak in a way that the status quo is fine and just something we have to suck up. People with my point of view want it understood that if the USDA is not going to change its direction, it serves no purpose. It's put itself in the crosshairs of why do we have it? If it wants to reform itself and start speaking to the people who produce the food and listen to us, what we want them to do, what we must have them to do, and that includes on me as a dairy farmer, I should be able, as a farmer, call for a hearing. I need to be able to use my free speech. The farmers and the ranchers know how to fix these problems. The government refuses to listen and has employed a behemoth agency that shuffles papers and implements the policies coming out of Congress and whoever's in the White House. There's a uniparty here, I'm sorry to say, on these agricultural and food policies, and it needs to be shook up. At the very least, I would need an ombudsman at the USDA, specifically employed to take all the dairy farmers' complaints and get solutions lined up. When I call USDA, they tell me point blank they have no obligation to speak to me. There's no way that I can call a hearing, and there's no way they have any obligation to include my costs in the federal formula, which was passed into law in the year 2000. Wow. When I call my congressman, I'm told to call the Ag Committee. Well, I didn't vote for the Ag Committee. I voted for a congressperson, and I want to know why each congressperson in the House, each senator, is not in touch with what's happening to me on my dairy farm caused by federal policy, which is completely tilted towards industrial food, globalization, and free trade.
And the consumers are going to be hurt because industrial food isn't really very healthy. It's not wholesome. And if we look at all the recalls that have happened even this year in 2024 so far, it's extraordinary how many different food products have been recalled. So in terms of the basic job of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, protecting farmers, not happening. Keeping food safe, not happening. Enabling growth in rural communities and farm communities, not happening. I don't know what they do except cause trouble.
Well, they have basically implemented policies that are confiscating and devaluating my private property. I mean, this is a taking.
Yep.
Okay, I just put it in perspective. In the 70s, when we had what they call parity, and you don't have to understand that. Parity adjusted approximately to what the costs are now. I would be getting about $58 a hundredweight. My husband got a milk check recently for $18.
God.
And if you look at the figures of the number of remnant dairy farmers that have gone out of business just since the last farm bill, and I don't know if you have access to those figures, and that's what Kathleen's alluding to. Those of us hanging on are literally hanging by a noose that's tightening. And the other ones also went through this. When you're losing as many dairy farmers as you've pointed out that we've lost, and we know the Flanagan report is out there. If it hadn't been for Senator Hubert Humphrey, we wouldn't have known about it. And part of the land grant role in this is they kept telling us that we were inefficient. We didn't understand economies of scale. We're an anachronism. We're a dinosaur.
And it's so patronizing. Those kinds of conversations, talking about farmers in that way, is so incredibly patronizing. Right, it is time to draw this episode to a close. I want to thank both of you for looking at the USDA the U.S. Department of Agriculture strategic
Needs to
plan.
be looked at a lot more.
And it really needs fixing. It's just a very broken document. And as Brenda's been saying, it does not serve farmers, and it is no longer the People's Department. And that's what we have to say after looking under the hood at the mission statement, goals, priorities, metrics. There aren't any. And communication style, really bad, of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. This has been episode 9, Under the Hood, looking at the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Thank you both.
Thank you.